happy and blessed and joyful to have Abuna Theodore with us here in the meeting. Probably this is the first time we have Abuna with us. Uh, as you know, Abuna Theodore is from Kitchener, St. Mary and St. Maurice Church in Kitchener. So for him to come especially for us, this is a great blessing and a great honor to have Abuna with us. And there is a special connection with Abuna with another priest. Maybe some of you know, maybe some of you do not know. So after his talk, I want you to tell me who is he connected to. So I'm not gonna give it away. Some might already know. Who doesn't know who's Abuna related to? Does not know. You do not know. Okay, so after Abuna talks, because when I talk to him, I'm like talking to his sibling, his brother. So we're gonna find out. So I'm leaving this as a quiz for you. But of course, you need to focus on what Abuna is saying, not just figuring out only this. So Abuna, thank you for coming, and we'd like to take your blessing with us. Thank you.
It's always a blessing to be here, and sincerely, it's always a blessing to be with Abuna Butros. He is a father and a beloved father at that. And now I've got to figure out how to try and mask how my relative. Oh, perfect. Absolving my Father in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So as you're aware, today's topic is on faithfulness, and so I'm kind of giving away the answers to some of the questions that I wanted to start with. So forgive me, but I wanted to start with a few questions, and I think all throughout the talk today, I'd like today to be as much of a conversation as possible. If it's just my voice, then it's going to be really boring. And it's going to take a lot longer because I'll wait for people to start speaking. But I wanted to start out with a couple of hypothetical questions for you. The first of which is, suppose that I want to learn how to play the piano. How would I go about doing that? What would be the process? Take lessons. Okay, so how would that look? What would that look like?
Look for a place or a studio or that first lessons. Try to search online, do your research.
Very good. Okay, and then what would the lessons look like, and what would the rubric look like for learning? Start small. Okay, and then what? Practice. Very good. And I practiced what, for like a week? For longer. Okay, so like how long ought I to practice for?
Depends how quick you can learn.
Okay. Okay. Yes, exactly. It's gonna take some time. It's gonna take some practice. It's gonna take a teacher. Okay, so another question. Let's say I want a 6-pack. How would I get a 6-pack? Impossible. Theoretically.
Eat healthy.
I would eat healthy. Okay, and I go to the gym again for a week?
No, it becomes a lifestyle.
It becomes a lifestyle. Very good. So what does a lifestyle look like? Every day. Very good. And Aki, you sort of alluded to something which was there's a health component to it. There's an exercise component to it. So if we had to break these down and look at each of those components, how would we do that? What does the health component look like? What does the exercise component look like? We'll start with the health one. Eat healthy. Okay, so could a person develop a 6-pack, for example, while like cheating all the time, having their cheat meals all the time? Likely?
No.
Not likely. Less likely than it is to get a 6-pack in the beginning. Okay, so they've got to live a particular lifestyle. It's the dry chicken breast and like water all the time type of lifestyle, right? There might be some flexibility here and there, but there is a rigor that's required, right? And then there is, as you guys alluded to again, there is an exercise routine, right? And that exercise routine has to be incredibly regular. It can't just be, all right, I'm going to do this once on day one, on January 1st, right after I've made my New Year's resolution, and then again, December 31st, when I'm counting how many times I've gone to the gym. If I'm doing that, I can't expect a whole lot of progress. Okay, another hypothetical. I want to learn French. How would I go about doing it? Download an app, Duolingo. All right, so I download Duolingo, or I get on YouTube, and then I do lesson 1, and then what?
Every day you practice it.
Yes. Every day I have to practice. I have to follow lesson 1 with lesson 2, and lesson 2 with lesson 3, and I have to do the homework, and I have to have a trainer. Right? There's a particular degree of rigor, of regularity, of constancy, right? And we're starting to see, I think, a little bit of a theme. And that leads me to the last question. Let's say I identify the person that I believe that I want to spend the rest of my life with, the person that I want to be united to in marriage. How would I work on a relationship with that person? What would that look like? Investing time. Again, when we look at the same sort of kind of trend, right? Can we go out one day and then, the next 3 months, 6 months becomes radio silence? No, right? There is a degree of regularity that's required. There's a degree of commitment that's required. There's a degree of faithfulness that's required, of constancy that's required. And when we think about anything that's worth anything in life, this idea of faithfulness, this idea of constancy, of regularity, we see it as a common trend. Right? And this isn't just in the secular realm, so to speak. It's not, right? Like there's this whole, this 10,000 hour concept that I'm sure we've all heard of, and it's because it's true, right? Anything that is worth something requires effort. And when we talk about our spiritual growth, I think one of the most common questions that all of us face with ourselves, when we look at ourselves and reflect upon our own spiritual growth, our own spiritual struggles, is why am I not moving? Right? When we sort of self-reflect and we're like, okay, almost like the December 31st, beginning of my New Year's resolutions type time, we look back at our year, we look back at our progress, we look back at our growth. And I'm not suggesting that we ought to always sort of size ourselves up to, so to speak, and figure out how spiritually mature I am. But really, when I just try and look at where am I going, how am I heading, right? In what direction am I heading? A lot of the time, something that I think we really struggle with is, am I actually making progress? Am I actually moving forward? And it's one of the things that I think we often approach with frustration our spiritual directors about. Right? Why am I not moving? And the answer to this question, it can be many, right? There's a lot of reasons why we might not be moving, and sometimes we are and we just don't notice. But I think one of the most common reasons that we're often not is a lack of faithfulness, a lack of constancy, a lack of commitment, a lack of dedication. When we think again to all of those questions of things, admirable things that we might want to do, right? And the work that it takes to do it, when we look at our spiritual progress, we see that we're not actually putting that effort, that struggle, that constancy into our spiritual growth. So I thought today, rather than lecturing about what faithfulness ought to be, that we would look at a series of examples of what faithfulness looks like in the lives of saints. And I think what we can do is we can take a number of these stories and we'll sort of stop after each one and discuss and dissect and try and see what it is that faithfulness looks like in the life of that particular saint or the life of that particular righteous individual. Because some of these are not saints in a sort of a traditional way in that we're saying, okay, they have been canonized. Some of these people have departed already in recent memory. Some people have been canonized as saints. Some of them are people who are living lives as saints, who are still alive, who are among the holies. We are all saints, right? Often called to be saints. But if we look at the iconostasis behind us and we think about any one of the saints that surround us, faithfulness we can find is a common theme, right? We could dissect anyone here and say, how do we see faithfulness in their lives, and we could write a book about it. So it is a common attribute that no one can accomplish sainthood without faithfulness. So I wanted to start out with an excerpt from a book by Abuna Lu'a Sidiros. Who here is familiar with Abuna Lu'a? A handful are familiar with Abuna Lu'a. So Abuna Lu'a, he departed last year. Abuna Lu'a Sidiros, he was one of three priests that was serving in Sporting in Alexandria. He was serving with Abuna Bishoy Kamil and Abuna Tadros Malati, and Abuna Lu'a was sort of back and forth between the Diocese of Los Angeles and his church in Alexandria. And Abuna Lu'a, he was among a group of individuals who were rounded up and imprisoned when Sadat was president. He basically took a whole slew of bishops, of priests, of prominent lay people, and he threw them in prison. And he accused them of like rebellious activity. The exact term is not coming to my mind right now. But essentially they were rounded up, they were thrown in prison, often not knowing exactly what they were charged with, and they had no idea when, if they would ever be returned to their homes, to their families. Abuna Lu'a himself was married, had children, and at the time his family was living in the US. And at the time he had been present in Egypt coincidentally. And the conditions in the prison in which he was staying were very much unlike the prisons that we would find in North America, right? Our North American prisons are 5-star hotels compared to the prison situation that Abuna Lu'a would have been facing. And so this book, it's a beautiful read. It's a free PDF. I encourage everyone to download it. It's called Memoirs of My Imprisonment. I wanted to start with a quick excerpt from this book. So he's describing the situation in this prison, and this prison is in Wadi Natun. So he starts out like this: the poor quality of the hygiene in the ward caused some of us to suffer diarrhea, and Bishop Beeman's health was declining. However, Wadi Natun, which is where the region, which we find also several monasteries, but it's the region where this particular prison is, Wadi Natun proved to be a favorable opportunity for prayer, reading, and Bible study. This is when you stop and contemplate even on just this one sentence, this is a very strange thing to say, right? That we're saying, oh yeah, prison provided an ample opportunity for prayer, reading, and Bible study. Bishop Beeman led evening Bible study sessions. So he's painting a picture of what their life looked like in prison. Bishop Beeman led evening Bible study sessions during which we studied the letters of the Apostle St. Paul, and everyone enjoyed dedicated time for meditation. They used to turn off the lights in the ward at 9 p.m. and we were ordered to sleep. Some of us would pray their memorized prayers, or other spontaneous individual ones. Some of the fathers that enjoyed praise or tazbahah would raise up early in the morning to pray it, as some of them had portions memorized. But sometimes they would still face the challenge of the lack of electricity when they would have to resort to reading parts of the psalmody. So every night they would wake up in the middle of the night and they would want to pray the tazbahah. But the lights were cut at 9 p.m., right? And there was no electricity that would come to the cell. And so he's describing that nighttime comes and now there's a problem. Okay, but since prison does not provide luxuries, prisoners learn to make do with what they have. So the fathers invented a way to help them overcome the darkness in the early hours of the day. They created a lantern. A tin can became the body of the lantern, and small threads from an old blanket became the wick. And they solved the oil problem by saving some of the oil served over the beans daily. So they would get like their daily round of food, which was also, like as he describes in another part of the book, it was absolutely disgusting, like rat droppings inside, like it was terrible. So they would basically siphon the oil from the top of the food because they needed a lamp, right? So they basically constructed a lamp. They found an old can, they've got like the frame of the lamp. They needed a wick, and so they take the threads from an old blanket that they find, right? And then they need the oil, so they siphon off the oil from the top of the flue. Okay. In this way, they overcame the obstacle of light, and they continued praising happily with nothing to stop them. Bishop Tedros and Bishop Pham enjoyed Tizbaha. They would wake up happily early in the morning to enjoy praises, and then many of us would join them. On a humorous note, Father Tedros Malati used to wake up early as well, and even though he is not proficient in hymns and Tizbaha, he still liked to join. So I used to joke around with him, begging him to refrain or to stop singing, because he made up his own tunes, and he would eventually make us all forget the real ones. We also held Vespers without actually raising incense, of course, because they don't have any censers, they don't have a Shurya, praying while the church's saints feast during our stay at Wadi Natun. Interestingly enough, on all occasions we found pictures of the celebrated saints, and we would make a procession with them encircling the ward. They were small pictures, about 6 by 10 centimeters, so just those little, you can imagine those little like paper icons that we sometimes hand out. But these Vesper services were characterized by a special constellation, especially because we were living in the wilderness of St. Macarius the Great. Okay, so faithfulness. Why is this a story of faithfulness? And what lessons can we extract from what Abuna Luke is telling us? Is that? You can do a lot with food. Multifunction.
In the darkest of times, they found light.
In the darkest of times, they found light. Yeah, literally. Yes. So how is that faithfulness?
I think it's the consistency, despite the circumstances, it doesn't matter, where or what was happening, they were consistent with, I think even when they were saying, the, the Feast of the Saints, they still would find a way of celebrating it.
Yes.
Regardless.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. When we think about all of us individually, our own prayer life, for example, right? Or our own church attendance. How quick are we to find a reason to not pray, to not go, right? What is the effort that we would be willing to go through to push through an obstacle? And this, I think, is almost it's like a litmus test to faithfulness, right? A faithful person is faithful in spite of the circumstances. They don't look at the circumstances as an excuse to not do something. They're like, no, this is what I want to do. This is what I need to do, even if it's not what I want to do, right? If we're to draw back to the six-pack analogy, right? You can almost contrast a person who is committed to that goal versus not by what does for example, their vacation look like, right? A person who is really a fitness nut, and I'm not saying that this is a healthy thing versus an unhealthy thing. I'm saying what a fitness nut looks like versus a non-fitness nut, right? A person who is really, really dedicated to that goal, who's made that thing their number one priority, is going to say, okay, if I'm going on vacation, then I need to make sure that somehow I'm exercising while I'm on vacation, right? Or if I'm going to a conference, okay, so I need to find a hotel that's got a gym. I need to find a way to have my chicken breast and my water while I'm out, right? A person who is not dedicated to that particular goal is going to be free for all, right? But what we can see in the life of Abuna Luke and in the life of the people that surround them is that there is nothing that will stop them, right? They're like, okay, well, we don't have our books. Some of us have memorized some stuff. Let's just do the stuff that we've memorized. Right? Okay, we found service books, but it's too dark. Okay, no problem. We're going to find a way. Right? There is nothing that gets in the way. Right? This is a hallmark of what faithfulness looks like. One of the really interesting anecdotes that we can see here is the last line. go. Sorry, give me a second here. He says they were small pictures when they're talking about they're doing the same processions. He says there were small pictures about 6 by 10, but these Vesper services were characterized by a special constellation, especially because we were living in the wilderness of Saint Macarius the Great. It's a very mysterious line, and it almost makes you wonder what Abuna Luke was actually referring to when he says there was a special constellation. And while Abuna Luke is not around with us in the flesh for us to ask him exactly what this special consolation is, we can see here evidence from the lives of the saints that Christ doesn't abandon this. Right? Christ sees this faithfulness and is granting him here something. Right? That there's something special about this experience. And this is a fruit that we can see in the life of faithfulness. Right? That God doesn't leave his children hanging. He rewards this faithfulness. Okay. So that was the first story. The second that I wanted us to analyze was the life of Saul and David, the interactions between the life of Saul and David. How did Saul's start come to be of his kingdom, of his kingship? How did it start? Sorry, this is Old Testament Saul. Sorry, forgive me. I should have specified. Yes, he did. He lost his donkeys, and he was sent to go. Look for them. What was the situation looking like in Israel at the time? There was a particular ask from the people of Israel. What were they looking for? They wanted a king. And who chose Saul? Who chose him? Okay, so Samuel was involved, right? But who ultimately chose him? Samuel anointed him. But who chose him? Sorry? God. God chose him. Okay, so God, of all of the people that were around, God selected Samuel. So what does that tell us? Samuel has potential, right? God wouldn't randomly select Samuel to be like, see, look, there's a sucker. He's no good. Right? That doesn't make any sense. God selected Samuel. He chose him, which means that Samuel had potential for good. Saul had potential for good. No, Samuel did, and he fulfilled it. Saul not so much, unfortunately. Okay. Saul repeatedly refused to follow the commandment of God. If we look at the sequence of events that happens, the interactions that happen with Samuel, he starts out decent, right? But over time we start to see this particular attitude in Saul that he, one, is incredibly disobedient, and two, he's an incredibly jealous guy. Very, very jealous guy. And jealousy is one of the main causes of his downfall. And God is unhappy about this. It's not like he's angry. No, there's what you see actually through Samuel is you see a genuine sadness. Samuel actually at one point after Saul's disobedience, we're told that Samuel wept all night. He wept all night over Saul's disobedience. And David gets dragged into the picture, the poor guy. David's interactions with Saul, they happen on a few different levels and kind of almost introductions and reintroductions. On one level, he gets brought in because after God withdraws his spirit from Saul, we start to see Saul kind of go nuts, right? The grace that was once present in his life is no longer there, and he starts to go crazy. Whether it's because of a demonic possession or whether it's because of some sort of psychological illness, it's not entirely clear because there's sort of anthropomorphic terms that are used in describing what's happening to him. But he goes through these fits of rage. And David is brought into his court because David plays the lyre, right? Like the harp. And his playing of the harp had this calming effect on Saul. And so Saul begins to develop a relationship with David. And then Saul's relationship with David, it develops even further when David defeats Goliath, right? We know that David goes to Saul after he hears the Philistines, blaspheming against God. David has this holy zeal, and he's like, how could this be? Right? I will take him out by the power of God. And so he goes to Saul, and he's like, Saul, I want to fight him. And Saul gives him his armor, right? He gives him his blessing to go. David goes, he defeats Saul, right? And Saul is so happy initially, right? Saul sees him, and he's so impressed with him. He's like, whose son is this? And they're like, oh, he's the son of Jesse. And Saul says, keep him here, right? Like, he loves him so much. And Jonathan, Saul's son, loves David so much. They're like, no, he can't go. Keep him here. Okay? And this is where this passage starts. And I've taken a few verses and I sort of skipped a few for brevity. But it starts like this. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. He became like a captain. And this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. But as they were coming home, when David returned from slaying the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul, with timbrels, with songs of joy, and with instruments of music. And the women sang to one another as they made merry, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Right? So David's come back, he defeated the Philistines, right? And the people are rejoicing, and they make up this song. The women make up this song as they're dancing, and they're like, Saul is killed by the thousands, and David by the 10,000s. This was not meant to be an insult to Saul, right? It was meant to be a song of praise, a song of joy, right? To commemorate this beautiful thing that had happened. Remember when Goliath was threatening them all, that they were afraid people would flee when the guy would yell, right? So they're like, there's hope here, right? And even Saul's name is mentioned, right? It's not even like Saul has been forgotten in this picture. But that's not how Saul took it. Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom? Here we see clearly Saul's insanity, right? The guy is king. He has the kingdom. This is the difference between David and Saul, is that Saul is king, David is not. And he hears this song, he's like, what more could David possibly have? Just the kingdom, right? And poor David, like, the guy's done, seemingly at least, nothing wrong. And Saul eyed David from that day on. This is the beginning of a long, drawn-out saga that could be like an action film. And the next day an evil spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. This is the next day, Saul had his spear in his hand while David is playing his music. And Saul cast the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. He wants to throw the spear right through his chest. But David evaded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel. This is a little while later, I've skipped a bit. Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the wild goat's rock. So here we see now the jealousy in its effect. And as we're reading the story, I want you to try and this, because this is what we're going to do next kind of together, is I want you to imagine yourself in the place of David, right? Imagine what this whole scenario looks like to him from his perspective, right? And let's look at how he's acting in relation to this perspective that he has. Because a lot of the times when we read scripture, we just read through and we're like, beautiful story, that's so nice, right? But if we really place ourselves in the eyes of David, in the position of David, we can see why God loved him so much. Because David has his faults too. We can talk about that, but we can see what's so special about this man. Okay, so Saul has now taken this person who has saved Israel, really, by the power of God, and now he's pursuing him. Saul is pursuing David with 3,000 men. One guy. He's pursuing one guy with 3,000 men. So He seeks his men in front of the wild goats' rocks. And he came to the sheepfolds by the way where there was a cave, and Saul went to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. And the men of David said to him, Here is the day of which the Lord has said to you, Behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as shall seem good to you. This is what David's servant is saying. He's saying, just like we say in the liturgy, almost like, Alleluia, this is the day which the Lord has made, right? This is the same spirit that you can see in the words of David's, in the words of David's servants, right? Of David's men. They're saying, Saul has been pursuing you. They know that David is righteous. They know he has done nothing wrong. And they're saying, God has delivered Saul into your hands. Tfaddal, go ahead. Here he is. God has given him to you. Right? He's placed him here for you to finally, not even exact your revenge, be free. Right? Okay. Then David arose and stealthily cut off the skirt of Saul's robe. He cut off the back piece of his robe. And afterwards, David's heart struck him because he had cut off Saul's skirt. He said to his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put forth my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed. So David persuaded his men with these words. The men needed to be persuaded against doing something. David persuaded his men with these words and did not permit them to attack Saul. And Saul rose up and left the cave and went upon his way. Afterward, David also arose and went out of the cave and called after Saul, My lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and did obeisance. He bowed before him, did a matanya before him. And David said to Saul, Why do you listen to the words of men who say, Behold, David seeks your hurt? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave, and some bade me kill you. But I spared you. I said, I will not put forth my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the skirt of your robe in my hand. For by the fact that I cut off the skirt of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me upon you, but may my hand shall not be against you. I'm going to read one last passage from this story, from this saga that skips quite a bit forward. Actually, before I read this, this is what Saul responded. He says, When David has finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, Is this your voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you evil. So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. And now, behold, I know that you shall surely be king, that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Okay. So, this is a long story. Why? Why is this a story of faithfulness? And what lessons about faithfulness can we extract?
I think when it was like the easier road for David, like just even just to be free, um, like he still persisted in keeping in mind that no, he's the Lord's anointed, so it's like choosing the harder path. Although just kind of killing Saul would have been like no one would have held it against him.
Yes.
Like it would have been like the easier thing to do, but
Yes.
he still chose to do other things.
Yeah. It's not only the easier thing to do, is a great point, because it's not just the easier thing for him to do for himself. Here we see that David actually needed to persuade his men not to hurt him. Right? He had to tell the men, no, he's the Lord's anointed. Not even you will lay a finger on him. What was it like for David? Imagine you were David. How do you think he felt? He's happy, everyone was nice to him. What did his life look like? Sorry. What's that?
Stressful?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Stressful?
Stressful, absolutely. Absolutely.
Wanted to like hide.
Yeah. He was a refugee. He was running around everywhere, fleeing, right? Imagine you were David, and you had to pray to God. You were about to pray to God and be like you're offering up your prayer, like you're in this situation. What would your prayer look like? What would you be saying?
So it probably would be for the danger to go away. So get rid of Saul, right? Like for example, like my enemy's here to hurt me. Like get rid of him. And him being put in that situation where Saul's right there and you take advantage of him, he thought that well that is your chance, but no, he wasn't even fooled by that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What emotions would you feel?
Betrayed.
Sorry?
Betrayed.
Betrayal? Betrayal by whom?
Saul.
Okay.
Like
Very
he
good.
did all this. He's fighting for him. He's
Very good.
one of his best soldiers, but
Very good. Very good. And I think if you hold on to that last thing that you said here, that he's fighting for him, that what did he do wrong? Right? Like what? If I was Saul, I'd be like, what did I do? What did I do to deserve this? This is unfair. Right? We feel resentful. Resentful perhaps towards Saul, perhaps even resentful towards God. Right? Like, God, like you selected me to do this. Right? You called me to be your anointed one. Like I was just a shepherd. I was content taking care of sheep. I wasn't even there. I wasn't even there when Samuel came to the house to select someone, right? Like, and nobody even noticed. It wasn't until Samuel was like, "Is there anyone left?" And then his dad's like, "Oh yeah, we've got this other one." So when you think about what faithfulness looks like, and we want to draw this into our own lives, right? And we want to start when we read the Bible, when we contemplate on these stories, we want to understand how that looks in my life. Each one of us needs to look at that, right? And say, okay, in what way is that me? In what parts of my life have I feel like this is unfair? In what part of my life do I want to give up? In what part of my life does it just make sense for me to choose the easier way? And here we can see what's so special about David is that he doesn't. That his faithfulness is bigger than his faithfulness to Saul. Some of us might look at this and might be like, oh, he was very faithful to Saul, which he was. He was faithful to Saul. But he was faithful to Saul because it translated from a higher thing. That higher thing was that he is the Lord's anointed. He is the Lord's anointed. He's God's anointed. His faithfulness was to God. And his faithfulness could not be betrayed for any reason, even in spite of his own life, of every aspect of his life being at risk. There's a point that we read that's so disturbing about David's life, that he actually flees into the land of the Philistines. Can you believe that? Isn't that nuts? That David was safer among the Philistines. He kills their captain, and he's safer in the land of the Philistines than he is among his own people. Imagine what that looks like for each of us in our own context. Imagine how we would feel if the people that we're closest to are betraying us. And faithfulness in this case, it looks to God alone. Right? What do you want from me, and I will do it. I will be a stranger. I will take whatever it is that you have called for me. And we see in Saul's life this constant beautiful words of repentance, these tears of like, no, I'm so sorry, you will be the king. And by this point, David knows him well enough after this saga that he doesn't go back. He's like, okay, great, cool, I'm still running. He continues his run, and rightfully so, because we're told just a few chapters later within the book that Saul pursues him yet again. And yet again, David is presented with yet another opportunity to slay Saul. Right? He goes into his tent, he creeps into his tent, and he finds a deep sleep has not only come upon Saul, but upon the people that are in Saul's tent to guard him. And so David goes in, and again, he does not slay Saul. He doesn't learn his lesson, so to speak, right? He doesn't say, okay, fool me once, right? Like, that's not his mentality. His mentality is, no, I will continue in this situation, even though this person has been given into my hands yet again. I will continue to follow God. And yet again, he takes the water jug that's in Saul's tent to prove to him, to prove to Saul his faithfulness, his loyalty. He takes the water jug that's in the tent. He takes the spear that Saul had in the ground that he was going to be using probably to throw at David. And he brings it out. And he calls out to the captain of the army, the one that was supposed to be defending Saul. And he's like, what are you doing, man? He says, you should be killed. To the captain of the army, you should be killed because you weren't protecting the anointed one of God. And then Saul hears his voice. And Saul says, this is after the second time, I have done wrong. Return, my son David, for I will no more do you harm, because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Behold, I have played the fool and have erred exceedingly. And David made answer, here is the spear, O king. Let one of the young men come over and fetch it. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. The Lord rewards every man for his righteousness and his faithfulness. So the Lord gave you into my hands today, and I would not put forth my hand against the Lord's anointed. Behold, as your life was precious this day in my sight, so may my life be precious in the sight of the Lord, and may he deliver me out of all tribulation. Then Saul said to David, blessed be you, my son David. You will do many things and will succeed in them. So David went to his way, and Saul returned to his place. The last passage that I wanted to contemplate on is this from John chapter 10. This is our Lord speaking. He says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hireling and not a shepherd, whose own the sheep are not, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hireling and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. As the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Okay, so Christ here, he's teaching about two categories of people who care for the sheep. What are those two types of people? Very good. The hireling and the shepherd. Okay, what's a hireling? What does that mean? A hired hand, exactly. A hired hand. So we have the person who's the hired hand, the helper, the servant, the whatever, the person who's being paid, right? And we have the real shepherd. That's like the one who really cares for the sheep. What's the difference in terms of how they act?
One looks at the value of money and the value of his life, and says the value of his life is more. And one looks at the value of the life of the sheep and the value of his life, and says the value of the sheep is more.
Beautiful. Beautiful. How does that translate to faithfulness? How does this story translate to faithfulness? Who's the good shepherd? we know who the good shepherd is. Who's the good, the good shepherd? Someone say it. Christ is the good shepherd. He says, I am the good shepherd. Okay. Christ is the good shepherd. And Christ is faithful. Right? He is the faithful shepherd who never, ever leaves. Right? No matter what the consequences are, he will always be there. And that translates into this special relationship between the shepherd and the sheep. There's something beautiful that's there. They know his voice. There's something special about that relationship. And in his role as the good shepherd, he teaches us, he gives us something to emulate. He gives us something to copy. Right? That in our faithfulness as servants one to another, whether that's in our capacity as servants within the church, or whether that's in our capacity as servants to our families, or whether that's in our capacity as servants to the people around us, to our neighbors, to our enemies, to anyone. Right? We can see here the sense of, in spite of persecution, in the face of death, there's faithfulness. There's a particular incident that happened that this was exemplified that I saw that was really beautiful. One time I was asked to go to the hospital to give communion to a person that I'd never met before. I got a phone call from a person saying, hey, could you bring communion to such and such a hospital? It was a hospital out of town. There's a person who's there that needs communion. And I'm like, cool, no problem. I knew that I hadn't met the person, but I didn't know anything about his state, other than I was told to bring a small piece of the body and blood. I'm like, okay, no problem. So, like, the container is this big anyways. I'm like, how big of a piece could it be? And so I went, and I was told that the brother of this person would be meeting me in the hospital. And when I got there, the brother wasn't there. I went into the hospital room, and the only person who was in the hospital room was this sick person. And when I looked at this sick person, I thought he was basically dead. Like, I'd never seen anything like this. He was complete skin and bones, like to the point where he looked like a corpse. Like, not just like a person who was dying, no, like he looked like a person who had died. His feet were blackened like ash, like not like dark skin, no. Like, they looked like you could press and his skin would flake away. He had already lost his hands due to some type of, I guess, heart issue that had prevented blood from reaching his hands and his feet. So he had already lost his hands. They had been amputated, and they had been surrounded by bandage. And he was completely and totally unconscious. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm supposed to give this person communion. So I stood there, like, trying to figure it out for a minute, and I'm like, okay, there's no one else in the room. So I touched my finger against the communion, and I got a little bit of the blood onto my finger, and I kind of dabbed it on the inside of his mouth, because I'm like, well, the guy's unconscious, I don't know if he can swallow anything. So I did that, and then I prayed the prayer of the sick, because I didn't even know what else to do. I'm like, I'm here, I'm alone with this person who's, I feel like he's basically died. And as I'm praying the prayer of the sick, I felt some degree of consolation in being like, okay, this man is going to be, I know, receiving his healing. I'm praying for his healing. I feel like he's already passed, but he's going to be receiving his healing in the life to come. And I begin to make my way out of the hospital, and then I get a message from the person's brother, and the person's brother's like, oh, please don't leave. I'd love to see you. I also have never met the person's brother. And so I start talking to the person's brother, and I'm asking him like, how's it going, and like what are your, like how are you doing? And he's like, I have faith that my brother is going to be healed, and I really believe that there's going to be a miracle. The doctors, they want me to euthanize my brother. They've been talking to me about, they have a family meeting today. They wanted like him to have some sort of an injection to euthanize him. And the point of this story is not to talk about, like medical assistance in dying or euthanasia or any of this stuff. I'm not here to talk about those things, but I'm just saying this to give a sense of what the situation is. And so he said, please pray for this family meeting that we're going to be having. I really have faith that he will be healed. And so I didn't know what to say. And so I said, well, may God be with you. I'm praying for you, and I'm happy to come give communion anytime, and let me know how I can support the family. And we'll be putting his name and your names on the altar, and we have nothing but prayer. And in those sorts of situations, it's very difficult because it's like, well, like, God give grace, because I don't know what to say. Right? It's a very difficult situation. And, it's silent for a little while after this incident. And then a few weeks later, I get a call from a person saying, hey, can you bring communion to this person again? This person who spoke to me the first time, asking me, okay, can you come back and give communion again? So we're trying to make arrangements, and initially I didn't know if I was going to be able to make it that particular day, and this person really wanted that particular day because it was going to be the Feast of the Virgin Mary. And this person has had a history of miracles happening on the Feast of the Virgin Mary, so he really wanted me to come on the Feast of the Virgin Mary. And I'm like, I don't know if I can make it on this particular day. So we try and make arrangements, and thank God it was able to work out that I could come. And I go, and this man is completely conscious, can't talk, completely and totally conscious, like a different person, right? Like obviously hands are still amputated. And I'm like in awe, and I'm like, what happened? And he's like, oh, thank God for everything, right? Like same guy, like same spirits, same happy spirits as the first time, because even when he was asking for prayers, he was in happy spirits. And I'm like, how have things been going? Actually, and I forgot to mention this, I asked him before, like how often he comes, because the person was living in a city about 45 minutes away from the town where the hospital was. And so I was like, oh, like, do you come here often? He's like, oh, yes, I come. This is while his brother was unconscious. He's like, yes, I come every day. And I'm like, you come every day? And he's like, yeah, I come every day. And I'm like, what do you do? And he's like, oh, I sit beside my brother, and I talk to him, and I encourage him. And I read him stories from the Bible, and I pray for him, and I pray with him. The man is unconscious. Right? Like all of the doctors are saying like not only let him go, but like push him out. Right? And again, I say this not to talk about what type of healing this person would receive or anything like that. That's not the topic. The topic here, what we see here in the life of someone who's alive, which is this brother, is what does it look like to be faithful? Right? What does a life of faithful service look like? And we can see this in so many, what faithfulness looks like in so many facets of our life, right? When we look at Abuna Luke, we see what the life of faithfulness looks like in our prayer life. That we cannot move forward spiritually unless our life has this consistency, this I don't care what the circumstances are type attitude. I will pray. Nothing will prevent me ever from prayer. In the life of David, we see what it looks like to just live a life of faithfulness in spite of the circumstances, in tough and thin. In the Good Shepherd and in this brother, we see what a life of faithfulness looks like in our service one to another. So I'll end there, but I just want these to be stories that we can reflect on in the coming days, that we can try and extract and continue to extract meaning from. And as we think about all of the lives of the saints, the people that are in our lives and the ones that surround us through this cloud of witnesses, let's try and emulate them. Let's not make it just pretty words, but things that impact our hearts. And glory be to our God forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you, Theodore, for this reminder that we definitely need faithfulness, because we try to find excuses and the attitude of finding excuses is far away, is the opposite of faithfulness. Like finding excuses is, I deserve a break, I deserve a slack, I need to do this, and it's okay to do this. Uh, and thank you, because you've given us the ultimate model, our Lord Jesus Christ, and those who emulated our Lord Jesus Christ. He desired to go to the cross, the death of the cross, for his great love for us. And this is the biggest energy that I personally draw energy from. The Lord's love. His love is unwavering, is consistent. And that's why he says, I am the good shepherd. And seeing that there are people who were able to live up to this faithfulness. Of course, everyone has their own struggles, and of course we have our own weaknesses, and we struggle to do it. But seeing models who have lived this is giving us energy and motivation to try to live this life of faithfulness, because this is how we grow, this is what we benefit, this is what really brings us closer to our Lord Jesus Christ. So thank you, Abuna. And as Abuna mentioned, hopefully that this is something we reflect on tonight, now, and we are praying, and maybe put our commitment before the Lord in his hand. The little that we have, we put it in his hand, and throughout the week.